A guard in a stiff new uniform pointed a flashlight at an old woman kneeling in her own flower bed and told her she had 5 minutes to leave the property. She finished pressing the last bulb into the soil before she even looked up. "This property has had my name on every deed since 1971, she said. "Whose name is on yours?" The guard laughed and radioed for backup instead of an apology. 2 more men arrived wearing patches that read Blackwood Hills Security, though no such department had ever been licensed in the county. They said the board had authorized her removal for trespassing on association land. She asked calmly who exactly she was trespassing against. Nobody could answer, because the woman kneeling in that flower bed was Dorothy Kane, and beneath every road and lawn in Blackwood Hills Estates sat 110 acres that had never once stopped belonging to her family. The guards were about to find that out the hard way. Before we go further, have you ever had someone try to push you out of a place that was rightfully yours, using nothing but a badge and a confident tone? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you haven't. This channel is built on stories about quiet people who turn out to be a lot less quiet than expected. Now, back to the beginning. Because Dorothy's morning in the flower bed wasn't the start of anything. It was the moment 40 years of patience finally ran out. It was 6:15 when the golf cart first rolled up behind her cottage, a cottage that predated Blackwood Hills Estates by a decade. Dorothy was 71, small and unhurried, widowed 6 winters back, still tending the garden beds her husband Frank had helped her dig. The young man in the cart, Corey Lang, had been hired 3 weeks earlier by Meridian Guard Solutions, a private outfit brought in under pressure from the HOA's new president, Victor Aldrich. Corey had been told an elderly woman was trespassing near the tree line and needed to be removed, nothing more. He hadn't been told her name, and Victor didn't tolerate men who asked questions. Dorothy listened to his instructions and asked him to bring whoever had sent him. 20 minutes later, Victor arrived himself, already talking before he'd finished stepping out of his truck. He cited a supposed violation of the association's bylaws and threatened daily fines. Dorothy let him finish. She always let people finish, because by the time they were done, they'd usually told her everything she needed. "Which bylaws?" she asked. "The association's or mine?" When Victor gestured toward land stretching 2 miles to the county road and called it all HOA jurisdiction under the 1987 development agreement, Dorothy nodded. "Interesting agreement," she said, "considering my husband and I owned this land 16 years before it was signed and never sold an acre of it to anyone." Something like doubt crossed his face for the first time. Here's what Victor didn't know. In 1969, Frank and Dorothy Kane bought 110 hill country acres, paying it off over 11 years, building their cottage by hand. In 1986, a developer called Ridgeline Partners offered to buy 80 of those acres for a planned community. Frank refused to sell outright. Instead, they signed a long-term ground lease. Ridgeline could build and sell homes, and buyers would own their houses, but the Kanes would keep permanent title to the land itself, renewable every 25 years. Ridgeline folded in 1994. The HOA that formed afterward inherited a stack of old contracts nobody ever fully read. The lease renewed quietly in 1994 and again in 2019, each time because Dorothy drove the paperwork to the county recorder herself. For 30 years, it caused no trouble at all. Most residents had no idea the woman near the tree line owned the ground under their driveways, and she preferred it that way. Victor had read none of it. Elected 14 months earlier on a promise to professionalize the community, his first act had been hiring private security. Standing at Dorothy's fence, he had no idea he was about to force her to open a fireproof box that had sat untouched under her bed for years. 4 days later, over coffee, Dorothy mentioned the visit to her niece Sarah, a paralegal. Sarah's eyes sharpened immediately. Did this man know about the ground lease? Dorothy didn't think anyone on the board did anymore. That night, the two of them read through the original 1987 lease, and both renewals at the kitchen table until midnight. "It's about to become somebody's business," Sarah said. 3 days after that, Victor returned with a second vehicle and a formal ultimatum. 72 hours to vacate before a county removal order. Dorothy set down her watering can. "Did your counsel review the underlying land title before advising you to send this?" she asked. Victor hesitated. Then, for the first time, an edge entered her voice. The homes belonged to the residents, but the land beneath every house, road, and clubhouse belonged to her husband's estate and to her, under a lease the board had renewed twice without ever reading it properly. Victor drove away, not triumphant this time, but rattled. He didn't go home. He went straight to the HOA's old storage room and spent 3 hours alone finding the original folder, Ridgeline Partners Ground Lease Kane F. and D. Everything, Dorothy said, was true and worse. Buried in the document was a breach clause. Any unauthorized interference with the Kanes' quiet enjoyment of their land, including harassment through security contractors, would trigger immediate termination of the entire lease and full reversion of every leased acre back to the Kane estate, with no compensation to the association whatsoever. Victor hadn't just threatened a widow. He'd potentially handed her the grounds to reclaim the whole subdivision. Instead of telling the board, he decided to fix it quietly, permanently, before anyone else found out. 3 nights later, past 11, Dorothy woke to her front gate being forced open. Boots on gravel, 3 sets. She didn't panic. She pulled on Frank's old barn coat and watched flashlight beams sweep her garden. She recognized Corey's voice, then a stranger's, then a third voice that made her chest go cold, Victor's. She called Sarah in a steady whisper, "They're at the house, call the sheriff." Then did the one thing that mattered most. She carried the fireproof box to a false, bottomed closet floor Frank had built decades earlier, just in case. Victor pounded on the door, claiming an emergency search for concealed documents. Dorothy refused to open it, telling him plainly there was no valid removal order and he knew it. That's why he'd come at 11 at night instead of business hours with a deputy. She warned him, the moment that door moved, this stopped being a property dispute and became a crime for every man out there, not just him. The crowbar, scraping under the doorframe, stopped. Headlights broke the standoff, Sarah's car, then a sheriff's cruiser close behind. The guards scattered into the trees. Only Victor remained, frozen, when Deputy Ray Holloway stepped out. Every explanation Victor offered, an emergency inspection, a valid removal order, collapsed the moment Holloway asked to see paperwork that didn't exist. No arrest came that night, but Holloway logged everything and told Dorothy plainly, "Bring in a lawyer tomorrow morning." "I already have one," Dorothy said. "She just doesn't know yet how much reading she's about to do." What Sarah later uncovered explained everything. 3 months before his election, Victor had quietly begun negotiating with a developer to buy the association's common areas outright. An $11 million deal. The one obstacle was a ground lease held by a widow who wouldn't sell and could, if she ever invoked the breach clause, take the land back for nothing. He hadn't needed her gone over flower beds. He'd needed her gone before she understood what she owned. At the emergency board meeting that followed, packed with residents who'd heard rumors of a crowbar at Dorothy's door, new board member Priya Nazir pressed Victor directly. Had he tried to force entry into a resident's home at night with private security and no authorization? His deflections only deepened the silence. Sarah stood and read the ground lease summary aloud. By the final paragraph, the room had turned from Dorothy to Victor. "You knew about this," Priya said, not a question. Victor admitted he'd found the clause 3 weeks earlier and tried to resolve it quietly. An older resident, Walt Prescott, cut through it. He'd tried to bully an old woman off land that was never his, instead of reading the paperwork. The board suspended Victor 6-1 that night, and Priya became interim president. It should have ended there until Sarah, pulling county records days later, found a lien Victor had filed 6 weeks earlier through a shell company called Ridgeview Capital Partners with himself as sole managing member. It secured him a first right of refusal on any sale of the common areas, a personal payout hidden inside a deal he was supposed to be negotiating for the homeowners. It was fraud, documented and undeniable, and it explained exactly why he'd needed Dorothy silenced before anyone started asking questions. The county attorney opened a formal investigation within the month. Victor never showed his face at another meeting. Dorothy never sought punishment for its own sake, only what she received in writing 3 months later, a notarized acknowledgement that the land beneath Blackwood Hills Estates had always belonged to the Kane family. She hung it on the wall beside a photograph of Frank in that same garden, 40 years younger, shovel in hand. Now, when she kneels in her flower beds at sunrise, nobody tells her she doesn't belong. They already know better.